Hi Sean, I'm just adding you now. Bear with. Hello.
Hi, how are you?
Hello, I'm good. Brilliant. Okay, we're recording. Brilliant. I can cut that for the beginning bit out. I don't think we've got anybody joining us live just yet. But shall we get started straight away?
Yeah, exciting.
Okay, brilliant. Welcome back, everybody.
Oh, you've lost sound, Kat.
Oh, okay.
Disappeared there.
Yeah, no, that's always, it's just Zoom. It always cuts out at the beginning bit.
I know, mine does the same. It's so annoying.
It's like they've got this little fault thing at the first 2 minutes.
Yeah.
So welcome back to the Why Social Enterprise Summit. My name is Kat Luckock. I'm the host of the summit, and I'm really, really pleased. We've got through the 2 weeks, and a little bit sad that we're coming to the end, but I'm super excited that we've got Sian Conway from the Ethical Hour closing the summit with me to talk about all sorts of different things, but particularly around the consumers side of social enterprise, which we haven't really touched on much throughout this summit. So really, really pleased. I'm really glad that we're not glad, but glad we're coming to the end, and this has been a really successful summit. So as we get started, do you want to just introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about what Ethical Hour is and how you started it up?
Sure. Thanks for having me, Kat, and congratulations on such a good summit. There's been some really interesting topics and discussions and stuff, so well done. It's not easy to pull together, but
no. But it's been great fun.
Yeah, so my name's Sian and I'm an ethical marketing strategist, and I work with social impact brands that really want to scale. So I help them with their strategy on how they're going to do that, how they're going to grow, how they're going to get more customers, and crucially, how they're going to make more income so they can make more impact. And I also run Ethical Hour. So Ethical Hour is a network for anybody who wants to learn a little bit more about living and working ethically in line with their values. So we have we have ethical consumers in there, we have people running social enterprises, we have people who work for charities and not-for-profits, we've got journalists, anyone really that's interested in ethics and sustainability. And we have a weekly Twitter chat that is on Monday nights from 8 till 9 p.m. UK time, where we discuss a whole range of different ethical topics. We have a Facebook community, a podcast, and a blog. They're our kind of main pillars of what we do, but it's all about kind of spreading awareness around different ethical campaigns and bringing that community together so that people who want to make an impact realise that they're not alone and they can collaborate to make that happen.
Fantastic. Yeah, and I know it's such a great community to be part of as well, because there's so many brilliant people in there, entrepreneurs, people that are just interested in living more ethically, looking for new types of products and services, and it's just such an active, fantastic community to be part of. So highly recommend it to anybody that's interested in the ethical space, really. So we were going to sort of focus today's summit around consumers and consumer trends, and what we're seeing, or what you're seeing, has been changing and is changing in terms of both social enterprise, but I think even bigger than that, kind of the ethical marketplace.
Yeah.
And how not just social enterprises, but businesses selling all sorts of products and services are changing the way they're doing business, because they're recognizing that people want to see change. People are more conscious about where their products and services are coming from, how they're made, the resources, and the people that are producing those things as well. And I just thought this would be a really good topic. And I know that because of your background, this is something you're really, really passionate about. So can you just give us a little bit of background about what you did before Ethical Hour as well, and why you kind of came to that?
Sure. So I was working in corporate marketing. When I left the corporate world and went full-time self-employed last year, I was head of marketing for a cybersecurity software company. Mm-hmm. So totally different. But really my role there, and the roles that I was doing in the corporate world, were all about designing strategies for businesses. So looking at what the market potential was, so who their customers are and how they can break into the market and really become market leaders. Mm-hmm. And so a lot of kind of analysing market trends and getting to know customers, and then implementing that strategy. So designing sales funnels, particularly looking at how digital media, social media and that space can be used in a really highly converting way. So how you can really reach the people that you want to talk to. And that's basically what I've brought over into the ethical space with my clients now when I'm designing strategies and I'm working with them on whatever scale. You know, even if you're a small startup, you have to have a good understanding of your market and your target customers, and everything should start with who your customer is, because if you don't know that, then you're just kind of throwing spaghetti at the wall and hoping for the best. But if you know that target customer and you know the reasons why they will buy from you and the reasons why they would work with you and why they would be passionate about your cause, then you can be so targeted, and that saves you so much time and effort and money as well.
Yeah, no, definitely. So let's get straight into it then. In terms of what are the kind of trends that you're really seeing that have happened, I don't know, over the last 5 years or so, trends in consumers and the consumer market around ethical?
So the ethical market is a really interesting one because all the statistics are so positive, which is brilliant. So Ethical Consumer every year release a market report, which is really worth reading. It's very accessible. It's not jargony at all. And it's got lots of charts in there across different sectors. So things like household energy, food, fashion, all the different areas where we're consuming basically. And that for the last few years, that has shown a significant rise in the growth of the ethical market. So basically people are buying more ethical products and services. So that's really positive, and that's well worth a look at if you are running any sort of business in this space. So we're seeing a rise there. We're also seeing statistics telling us that people are willing to spend more on ethical and sustainable products, which again, people are saying that in surveys, so that's really heartening, but I'm going to come back to that in a second. And we're also seeing outside of the ethical market, because of that data and that rising trend, we're also seeing big companies start to latch on to ethical causes. And in particular, this last couple of weeks, we've seen it with one of the major supermarkets here in the UK take on palm oil and take on the Greenpeace film that they released earlier in the year about the orangutans being displaced because of palm oil, and making that into their Christmas campaign. So that fits more in the corporate social responsibility space, but we are seeing more meaningful CSR. So it's less about writing a check at the end of the year and more about big companies looking at how they can embed giving back, and because we're seeing that consumer demand for it. But what is also interesting is that when you actually get down to it and when you actually look at people's spending behaviour, we're not actually seeing that fully come through yet. Ethical is going mainstream. So in the media, we've seen plastic pollution, fast fashion and palm oil as 3 big trends this year. But the growth of fast fashion brands is still massive. The growth of the amount of plastic bottles purchased every minute is still massive. You know, it's in the millions. The growth in brands that use unsustainable palm oil is still massive. So although consumers are saying this in surveys, I think we've got a bit of surveyitis where people say what they want, they think you want to hear. And there's been studies done around the kind of psychology of ethical buying, and there was one in particular where they asked people in a queue at a coffee shop if they were within earshot of people, they would say they would pay 50p more for the fair trade blend, but if there was nobody else around, they would not pay the 50p more. So there's a whole complicated psychology around the social status of ethical and sustainable, and especially as it's becoming more fashionable this year to carry a reusable bottle, we are seeing that knock-on effect. But there's still that attitude behaviour gap between people saying they will pay more and saying that they want responsible brands and actually parting with the cash. So I think we're just at the beginning of the growth of this ethical market because of that gap.
Yeah, and I think that's it. And it's gonna, you know, these changes are, you know, in some ways the trends are really fast, and like, you know, like for example, alternative water bottles or coffee cups that or reusable ones that people carry around are brilliant, but then they're only brilliant in the long term if people are actually using them day to day and not just having them as an accessory and then still buying water bottles and coffee, you know, disposable coffee cups as well. It's not really creating that replacement, is it? So I think it was still, you know, and I think that's how it happens with behaviour change. It takes a while sometimes. You know, we've seen that even with the plastic bags here in the UK. Yes, you know, I certainly try as much as possible to have systems in place, so I know I've always got my reusable bags in the car. but sometimes I just don't. And I, if I have to go and do last minute shopping, it's not possible and stuff. And then you're like, and actually I've got to the position now where as long as I can carry everything, I just don't have a bag. So I look a bit crazy, but I'm like, that's better than me buying another bag because I know I've got loads at home.
Yeah, you do the supermarket juggle with all your produce. I do the same.
Good. I'm glad I'm not the only one. I do get some strange looks though.
Yeah.
So what was really interesting there as well, you were saying like there's been some really big trends this year: palm oil, fast fashion, and plastic. Are there any indicators of what those new trends might be for next year? Because I'm imagining there's always new things that are coming out.
Yeah, so I think we're just seeing the beginning of a lot of these trends. So palm oil has only really hit the headlines in the last few weeks, and Iceland, who are the supermarket that are really championing this, I have mixed opinions on the way that they're championing it, and I have written about this on my blog, but I think what has been good about it is it has thrown palm oil into the spotlight in the same way that at the beginning of this year, Blue Planet threw plastic into the spotlight and people suddenly woke up because it was there on our TV screens. And I think it's when we suddenly have that personal connection to an issue and we suddenly start seeing it. And I was talking to someone from Ethical Consumer on my podcast yesterday, and she made the point that actually we got discussing about it, and we said, if the palm oil plantations were in your back garden, you woke up every day and you could see them, you wouldn't stand for what was happening on them. But we kind of need to see that in front of us. So I think palm oil is just beginning, and I think there's going to be more awareness of that. Iceland did a survey that found that 58% of people that they surveyed weren't aware of just the issues around palm oil and why it's such a problem and why unsustainable palm oil is a problem. Yeah. I think that is a complicated issue because on one side of the fence you've got people saying you should boycott it altogether, which is the stance that Iceland have taken, and then on the other side you've got some brands and NGOs and organisations working really hard to set new standards for palm oil under the responsible palm oil things that are going on and the certifications that are trying to move towards. So I think these messages only get through to the mainstream when they get simplified. So a good example of this year was the Say No to Straws campaign, which massively took off. We've seen big brands, airlines, hotels really move away from plastic straws and really kind of ban them. And that was such a simple message that people could take it on. Whereas with palm oil, I don't think it's been simplified yet enough to the point where people, because it's in everything, it's everywhere, so it's so hard. So I think we're probably going to see that message continue and then hopefully become a bit more simplified along the way so that people start to adopt it. I also think climate change is going to stay massive on the agenda. It has been for the last few years. It is a major problem, but now that we've had these reports that say we've only got a decade to sort it out, I hope that this is going to be a decade of real change. So I'm hoping we're going to see trends in renewable energy and electric vehicles and things that fight climate change basically. But because we're starting to see the extreme weather and it is starting to be on our doorstep, we're going to need to make bigger moves on that. So hopefully that's going to be a key trend. And I think plastic will continue, and I do think fast fashion is just starting as well. We've got here in the UK, the government are reviewing the environmental impact. It's making the headlines. It was even on the radio when Primark were on stage essentially at that investigation the other day, that actually was ahead of Brexit in the reporting, which at the moment takes quite a lot to be ahead of Brexit in any report, and it was a bit of a welcome relief. So I think that as well is gonna continue.
Yeah, no, definitely, though, it's really exciting. And I think obviously lots of these things do relate back to the climate change, but I'm reflecting and talking to people as well about it becomes, I've been conscious of it for the last 15 years, probably longer, but when you turn on the news and you can't get by a single day without seeing some kind of severe weather, whether it's here in the UK or anywhere else in the world. We've seen in California those horrendous fires that have killed people, flooding, hurricanes in other parts of the world. They're becoming much more extreme, and they really are causing problems, not just immediately, but lives, but also and the infrastructure afterwards and the rebuilding. It's huge costs as well in terms of following up after those hugely devastating issues. And 10 years really isn't a very long, is it?
No.
Because we have been collectively talking about this since the 70s. You just think, we're 50 years on, and where have we really got?
Exactly, and emissions are still on the rise, and I think the problem is that it takes so long for any government in the world to get policy through and to get change, and obviously it's so complicated what's involved in that really there's not going to be that much impact within 10 years. But I think what we're seeing is consumers starting to take a more active role across the board on all of these issues. And I think partly we're fed up. We've got things like Brexit, we've got Trump. You know, I don't want to go down this route and get really political, but I think it's polarizing people, and people are really taking a stand for what they believe in. So I think what we're seeing is that the people that really do believe in saying no to unsustainable palm oil and tackling fast fashion, tackling climate change and fighting plastic pollution and standing up for these issues are really using their voice now and are coming together to make that happen. And when that does happen, we've seen the positive effect that can have. We've seen brands this year make big changes to their supply chains and their materials. One that comes to mind is when we were all outraged at the beginning of the year when we found out that there was plastic in our tea bags, and now the major players in the tea bag field, PG Tips, Yorkshire Tea, they've all said that they're going to move away from using plastic. But then what we have to remember is that does take time. These are massive businesses with loads of infrastructure, complicated supply chains, supermarkets to supply. So that isn't going to happen overnight. But what that's shown us is when we put pressure in the right places in the right way, we can have a major impact. And so I think we're starting to see that happen more and more.
And something I've become familiar with in the last couple of weeks, I suppose, and months, is lots of things I've been listening to on the radio and TV and investigations and things around that complexity, because and somebody highlighted it recently with me, you know, when we had here in the UK the horse meat scandal. And I think actually somebody mentioned it on one of the summit webinars. Actually, it was, you know, it's we have situations like that, and then consumers are outraged, but it's because of the complexity of the system that has been created, both in the food system, if it's in the fashion industry, if it's in, you know, material production. They're such complex systems that actually you know, faults or unethical behaviour or very small things can change without the whole system really realising. It takes a long time for them to unpack to see where the problems are. And then even something that you think as simple as, well, why can't they just take out the plastic in a tea bag? It's because the process of creating those tea bags is not that simple, and there'll be all sorts of different decision making requirements and stuff. And so in some ways it's kind of highlighting bigger issues in the systems that we've created, and actually these macro systems that really don't enable the quick changes that we need when we've got increasing kind of climate change challenges, but also when there is faults or, you know, disruptions in those systems, it's again really hard to actually create the change that we need quickly.
Yeah, and I think the biggest problem is matching up our desire for transparency and sustainability with our desire for convenience. Yes. We live in a very convenient culture where you can go down to the supermarket now. It probably won't take you more than 15-20 minutes to get there in your car, and you can buy food that's been grown on the other side of the world that isn't in season and has made it to your shelf. And because of the complex systems in place there, the supermarkets literally couldn't tell us whether there was horse meat or, you know, that could have been anything. That could have been poison. They couldn't tell us. They didn't know, because they don't know what's involved in their supply chains. And the same in fast fashion. That's part of the problem, because they're chasing that cheap price. They're outsourcing, and then the people that they're outsourcing to are outsourcing. And so somewhere along the line, somebody is paying the price, but they can't tell us where. And they do scrape by in these audits, and they do scrape by on these standards, because actually it all looks okay on the surface, but there's not that transparency. But I think what we're starting to see is people want that transparency. They want to know who made my clothes, who grew my food, where are things coming from, what's in it. And especially in light of scandals like that, you know, there's more and more demand for that. But are people willing to give up being able to go down to the supermarket and buy non-seasonal plastic packaged food? You know, there's this real demand for, we don't think things should come in plastic, but we also don't just want to eat seasonally. So who's going to compromise? Where is the middle ground going to be? And I think we're still working out what that looks like. And I think at the end of the day, as consumers, we're pretty lazy, we're pretty stuck in our habits, we don't actually want to pay more for things. So the pricing side of it is a real challenge, because especially with clothing, the price of clothing hasn't gone up since the 80s, and we are trained to believe that clothes should cost pennies.
Yeah.
So when an ethical fashion brand comes along who charges £50 for a t-shirt that you could get for £5 in Primark, the outrage is not at Primark for selling it for £5, it's at the ethical brand for selling it for 50.
Yeah.
But that's actually the true, we talk about true cost, that is the true cost. So take from growing the cotton all the way through to shipping that here and selling it in a store, or selling it on a website and delivering it to you, that's what it should cost, but we're not willing to accept that. So I think we're going to have to find this middle ground. We're going to have to find it quickly if we want to move on these issues.
And I think that is a really big challenge for us as consumers, is to really think deeply about that. I know it's something this last year particularly, I've been thinking about how I reduce plastic coming into my house within the kitchen. And it's been a real challenge, that exact issue of the balance between convenience and really recognizing that I have to give up that convenience. So I think a simple product like we're buying very regularly during the week, if not twice a week, is a bag of salad. And you think, well, there's lots of different options, so just don't buy it. I grow it myself, because actually then there isn't any plastic and I'm actually getting as much as I need, because it's usually a one-use kind of thing, because I usually get it for when we have family round or we've got friends round and stuff like that. It's simple, put it in a bowl and it's ready and you serve it, and it goes with lots of our meals. And the other thing then is that, well, the other way that I prefer to buy it, which is if, I remember as a child, only recently going to France, they are much better, although it is changing in France as well, at having fresh fruit and veg just out, unwashed salads, available. You literally just pick it up and they might have brown bags, but you can also just put it in your thing, in your trolley. That really isn't an option, certainly where I live. I know there's in big cities there are those kind of facilities, but also it then pushes you to think, well, what are the other solutions? Because I know there are fruit and veg boxes, and we've gone out then and sourced those things. And then you have those conversations about, well, it is going to be more, but this is the choice I'm making because this is important to me. And it is going to be less convenient, but again, that is just a choice I'm making, and I'll have to figure out other ways around my life to make it more convenient for me.
Yeah, I think this is the challenge. The consumer is put in that position of having to do all of that thinking and all of that weighing up the different options, and ultimately the compromise, because actually your compromise there is that you're paying more. So we're the same. There isn't a supermarket near us where you can get that without it being in plastic. So the compromise, there are farm shops, but they're out of the way. So the compromise is spending longer to go and get the food, or getting a veg box delivered, which costs more. So obviously not everybody is in that position. We have major social problems in this country of low-income families not being able to afford that sustainable option. So that is one issue. The other issue is actually a lot of people just won't want to change their behaviour. So for us as social enterprises and ethical brands, it's really getting to know our customers and their behaviour and who we're talking to. And I was in the supermarket recently and I did get what I could, not wrapped in plastic. And at the checkout, the girl went to put some of the veg into a plastic bag, and I said, oh no, don't worry, it can just go in here. And she said, oh, I just don't see all of the fuss around this no plastic thing. So I started questioning her about it, and she said, I just don't like the idea that, my broccoli is out on the side in the supermarket and people are touching it, picking it up, putting it back down, walking around with it, putting it back down. Too many people have touched it before I get it. Whereas if it's in plastic, I know that that's not a problem. And for me, I didn't get into it because there's a big queue and I just thought, pack your bags and off you go. But the problem is, what she's not considered there is that broccoli has grown somewhere. Somebody at some point has touched it to pick it out of the ground. And I think we're so disconnected to how things are made, how things are grown, where things are coming from, that we have a whole sector of consumers that are wanting that transparency and are wanting that. But we also have a big sector who don't really care. And I've seen it as well. I shared on my Facebook page all about the Primark statement where they were asked how can they justify selling a t-shirt for £2? How do they make a profit on that? And the head of ethical trade gave a very well rehearsed answer about where they cut costs. And it sounded quite legitimate, but then, you know, you've got in the back of your head, well, there's such a complex supply chain there, all the things we've just discussed. But somebody actually commented on that post saying it would take a lot to stop her from shopping at Primark because she sees that as her treat. Because she's on a relatively low income, she can get a lot for her money, and that's her treat. And she said, I do good in the community, I give back in other ways, so I don't see it as a problem, and it would take a lot to stop me shopping there. So I'm wondering what it would take, because I think, well, we've seen Rana Plaza, we've seen things happen. What would it take to get people to really stop? These businesses are still growing, so there's obviously a lot of people that share that mentality. So I think as ethical brands, as social enterprises, we need to make the decision of who is our market. Is it the already converted echo chamber of people that hear statements like that and think, well, how can you shop there and how can you justify that? Or are we trying to break more into that mainstream? And if we're trying to break more into that mainstream, we need to understand that those are the kind of objections we're dealing with. So I think it's an interesting consideration for us as brand owners and marketers of how are we going to widen out our market and what's going to change as our market widens.
Yeah, no, definitely. I wonder whether, like, for me, when you're talking about that, because this element and this question of judgment and judging consumers can often come in because people are making quite difficult decisions, you know, even if they are aware. And I am absolutely no perfect consumer. You know, I make bad decisions and things that I don't really want to purchase all the time, you know, and I try as hard as I can, but that's just life, isn't it? It is a learning process. And then you find out, I've just bought this and actually, yeah, it's full of palm oil. You know, and I've just, you know, so I'm making those small choices daily. So this past year, just, you know, I've made little changes in terms of the peanut butter that I buy, because I buy a lot of peanut butter. You know, those little things around salad, thinking differently about, and actually I make a bit more of an effort now to go to a supermarket that is further away. I will highlight them, Morrison's, because they are better in terms of they provide fruit and veg that isn't packaged. And that's both about the plastic, but actually one of their competitors, I notice when I buy their fruit and veg, this is a bit of a tangent, but and I know that they do this, you know, when they put it in plastic, they also fill it with a gas to preserve it longer. So as soon as you bring it home and take it out of that packaging, wash it, you know, put it on the side or put it in your fridge, it pretty much within 24 hours starts to disintegrate, because God knows how long it's actually been in this packaging, in this kind of, I don't know what they call it, but, you know, like a preserving agent, basically. And so for me, going to Morrison's, for example, and not all their stuff is plastic free, but I've got more variety, and it's definitely fresher because it's not wrapped in that plastic, which is almost counterintuitive because you'd think it would last longer, you know. Like you said, that other person you spoke to at a supermarket, it's almost more clinical, it's cleaner, it's safer to eat, but actually it's not. And as a consumer, I want stuff to last for a week in my fridge, you know. I don't want it just to buy it this day.
That's it. And it's challenging where some of our beliefs around that come from, because actually we've become a bit obsessed with everything being clinical and clean, and now we're finding out that that's not actually great for us because we don't have great immune systems now. So it's really interesting to see the whole consumer trends and things. I think the supermarkets are a really good example of that if you think about how they as brands position themselves. And I think Iceland is a really interesting case study for that. Morrison's kind of under the radar adopted a lot of plastic free and are we have a Morrison's here, and I find them very progressive in terms of they were one of the first where you could take your own plastic tubs to the fish counter, for example, if you eat fish or meat, and you could use your own packaging. But they've been very under the radar about it and haven't really shouted about it. Iceland, a few years ago, if you remember, their whole campaign was "That's why mums go to Iceland." They were all about being the cheapest option. They were very much a frozen foods brand, very much about convenience. And now they were the first ones to publicly announce that they were going to move away from plastic. They weren't the first ones to do it, but they were the first ones to make a big song and dance about it. And likewise with palm oil, they've been the first ones to really shout about what they're doing with palm oil. And if you think about what's happened in the supermarket scene over the past 5-10 years, we've had Aldi and Lidl come in at the very bottom of the market, very cheap and cheerful, but also good quality. And Iceland was maybe more on the cheap and cheerful, but not great quality. So then suddenly they have these two competitors that are winning awards for their products and are really movers and shakers in that space. And Iceland suddenly became a bit displaced, because you had, at one end, you had Waitrose, who were really going for like the middle class, higher income market, that are very ethically engaged. Typically that's where your ethical consumers tend to sit in terms of demographic information, because it is a more expensive lifestyle. And then you had Aldi and Lidl at the other end, who are appealing to the busy low-income mums who want the convenience but also want good quality. And suddenly Iceland were a bit misplaced and didn't have their existing market anymore. So they decided that rather than compete in that lower level price competition, they would reposition themselves towards the Morrisons and the Waitrose end of the market. And that's why we're now seeing them really shout about these issues, because they've said, right, we want to be in that market where there's more spending power. How do we get into there? We're going to do it by really shouting about these issues. It's always interesting to see why brands are taking on causes when they're not inherently a social enterprise or an ethical brand, and what that's saying about their market positioning. And I think when we look at things like that, it can help us with our own market positioning, because we can look at how they're doing it and see what's good and what's bad about it and how it's resonating, and then we can adopt that into our own kind of marketing strategies as well.
Yeah, no, and I think, from my perspective, Iceland has shown real kind of leadership in one sense, because I can't imagine it's that easy, particularly we know about the supermarket wars in the UK, to be the first to come out and commit to certain targets, which are going to be quite challenging for a relatively small, it's not one of the big players. And it's almost, it's both about, I suppose, educating its existing consumers, but also attracting those. I mean, Iceland is not a shop I ever shop at, but it's certainly a shop that I'm like, I might actually start going to see what they sell at Iceland if it's going to be palm oil free and they're reducing their plastic and they're changing their packaging. It does actually attract me when a brand comes out and says that publicly. So it's, I think, it is a great marketing tool, but it's also real leadership, I think, in terms of really looking across the board and saying, these are the big issues at the moment. We know we will attract new consumers if we do this, and this.
Yeah. And that's where, as smaller social enterprises, ethical brands, we can learn from it, but also use it to our advantage, because now everybody's talking about palm oil. So if you are a social enterprise or an ethical brand that somehow has a connection to palm oil, so maybe you're palm oil free, maybe you're involved in the campaign for responsible palm oil, maybe you somehow give back to orangutan charities, and you're not directly related to the palm oil cause, but you're related to orangutans, which are kind of the poster animal now for palm oil. Furthering that circle out, maybe you're related to the rainforest in some way. So maybe you give back to reforestation projects or communities who live in the rainforest, or animals that aren't orangutans but are in the rainforest. If you've got some genuine link to that campaign in some way, there is kind of a swell of conversation going on that you can ride to get your brand out there further. So there's loads of ways you can do that, from looking at what the press is saying and being ready and available to add comment to it. If you've got strong opinions and you're willing to speak out, you can get good press coverage from that. You could do some Facebook ads that target people that are interested in Iceland, because Iceland is such a big brand that they will be on there in the targeting, and when you set up Facebook ads, to relate to the palm oil cause and get in front of people that follow Iceland or are interested in what they're doing. You can even create your own content around it. So I've been talking about how the ethics of their marketing campaign and what's been good about it, what's been bad about it, and kind of doing a balanced case study. So you can jump on that and use that and get in with people that previously didn't know about your brand but are starting to care about the issues. And it's the same with plastic and the way that plastic has taken off. We're just going to start seeing that with fashion now. We've been seeing it for the year, and we always see it around Fashion Revolution, but particularly with this government review, particularly with the UN announcing now they're going to have a charter around sustainable fashion, that's just getting going. So it's thinking about how can you take these trends and turn them into content for your business to get the word out there, turn them into opinions to get you noticed by the press. And you really, that can be scary because you really have to come down on one side or the other. And obviously it's not always black and white, and you've almost got the curse of knowledge that you don't want to say it's this or it's that because you know the complexities, but actually it's a good way of getting you noticed. If you can get out there with that opinion to get people in, then you can start to explain to them. So there's all different ways we can use these trends in our marketing, but this, for me, this is where ethical brands need to be thinking about how they can position themselves for the next year. What are the trends going to be, and how can you use them to your advantage?
And how important do you think it is, Sian, to continue to educate and inform your consumers, your existing community, or even those potential people you want to bring into your consumer community, compared to just telling people about the results and the impact that the positive impact that you're having? Like, my sense is that there's still a lot of education out there, and there's a lot of people are quite confused because there's a lot of mixed messages, and there's a lot of perspectives about different things as well on these issues, aren't there? And like you were saying before about whether we look at sustainable palm oil and changing the practice, or whether we just ban palm oil altogether. There's complex issues in there as well. So how much should we as brands seek to educate?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I think we have to take into account the dual purpose of our brands. So as ethical brands, social enterprises, we exist to make an income, but then we use that income to make an impact. So on the income generating side, it's a really good way of getting the attention of the consumers that we want to buy from us. So it's really important that we do put our stake in the ground, that we do use this as part of the marketing story to get them in. But it's also really important that we remember that there is that attitude behaviour gap that we talked about earlier. So the driving factors of any purchase, whether you're an ethical consumer or not, or you're somewhere on that scale, it's always going to come down to price, quality, and convenience. That's just the way of the world. We live in a consumer-driven society, capitalist, so it's always going to be price, convenience, and quality. So you have to tick all those boxes, and you have to demonstrate that you tick all those boxes. So you need to be using reviews and good quality images of your product, and you need to be competing against the non-ethical brands. And then all things being equal, so you being on a level with another brand, your impact and your ethics are going to be the tipping decision, because people do want to make that difference. They are saying that, but the behavior isn't quite there. So you have to get on an equal playing field with them to be able to make that income. I do also think that because of the rise in that attitude, not necessarily in the behaviour, we are seeing a lot more greenwashing. So we're seeing a lot more brands come into the space and pretend to be more ethical and sustainable than they really are, and actually put their budget into the marketing to make them look like that than into the impact. So if you've got impact reports, if you've got impact measurement, if you've got tangible ways of demonstrating the impact that you're making, you also need to weave that into the marketing, because it's not enough to have good ethics, and it's not enough to say you've got good ethics. That can be the tipping point, but you have to back it up. So that's one side, that's the kind of marketing, the commercial element. And then on the impact side, where we're investing the income that we make, that's really important, because we've got to think, why are we in business? What's our big why? So that won't be the entire marketing message, but that is the reason why we exist. So in the bigger context, if you are, let's take palm oil as an example. If you're a brand that wants to change the fact that there are deforestation and human rights abuses and all this horrific stuff going on in palm oil plantations, you will have made your decision as a brand whether you are against palm oil altogether or whether you're in favour of responsible palm oil. That's your decision as a brand to make, and you will make your decisions accordingly. But then it's really important that you get people on board with that cause, because we as consumers are the ones that hold the power. It feels like we don't, because we feel like we're really small, and palm oil itself is a massive issue. All of these issues are massive. What can one person do about palm oil or climate change? But the companies aren't going to change. The big companies that aren't ethical generally aren't going to change unless there's money in it for them. There's not going to be money in it for them unless us as consumers say we're going to spend our money with the people that align to our values. The governments aren't going to change policy because it's hard work. It takes a long time, unless it's going to get them the votes. And the governments are often funded by the corporations. So there's kind of this whole little triangle going on of people working in each other's best interests or not, but actually the consumers are the driving power. So if we want an issue to change, we've got to get the consumers on board. So we've got to spread that message. We have to be careful how we do it, because you said before, shame and guilt and preaching and that kind of approach doesn't work. So we've got to think carefully about how we do it, and we've got to balance it with our commercial side so that we make that income. We don't go out of business before we can make that change. But I think we've got to demonstrate that impact, and we've got to get people on board with that message.
Yeah, absolutely, really important. Just very quickly, are there things, and so I've got a couple of other questions, but this has just come up. Are there areas like where can people go, consumers go, to find out more information about either the issues or the brands that they already use? Are there any kind of resources where they can kind of go and like just understand the issues more, understand whether their favourite brand is something that they're aligned to or not? Because actually just even, it's quite, a bad brand isn't necessarily going to promote that stuff, is it? But they might be doing stuff that you're not aware of as well.
Yeah, exactly. So, and it can be really hard to trust what the brands are putting out there, and it can be really time consuming to find this information. So I would recommend that everybody reads up about the 7 sins of greenwashing. Mm-hmm. It's quite a quick thing to get your hands on. If you literally just put 7 sins of greenwashing into your search engine, it will come up, and it's the 7 things to look for that might signal that a brand is lying to you about their ethics or their sustainability. So have those in mind, learn what they are, and start to spot them. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, then you will see them a lot more often than you want to, but it's a good place to start. Another really good resource is Ethical Consumer. So they have a magazine which, if you subscribe to their magazine, you do have to pay to subscribe, but they cover a lot of the issues. So I personally have learnt loads from them. They also independently audit a lot of brands, and you can, without subscribing, you can access some of their more historic data, and if you subscribe you can get really up to the minute. So if you're thinking of buying from a brand, if you put that into Ethical Consumer, they rate them across loads of different criteria, from their political stance to if they pay their taxes to their environmentally friendly behaviour and policies, all of that stuff. So that's a really useful place. And any kind of independent audit. So if there's an issue that you care about, have a look at what organisations are auditing that issue. So, for example, with beauty products, there's the Leaping Bunny certification by Cruelty Free International, and brands have to meet certain criteria. Obviously, there's fair trade, that's a really well-known one. There's direct trade if you're looking at coffee. And if you start to look at what the certifications are, that will teach you what some of the other issues are and also what to look for. And it's just a really good place to start, because you know that they've been independently audited. So they're not just greenwashing, they're not just telling you what you want to hear. And then obviously there's the Ethical Hour blog and podcast where we talk about all of these things. And communities like Ethical Hour, if you can meet like-minded people where you can kind of crowdsource some of this information and ask these questions. But I think really just get curious. Mm-hmm. Just start asking questions about where are your products and services coming from, who is involved in that production process, and all of those kind of questions.
No, definitely. And we're putting together a resource from this summit of all the things that people have mentioned, the research, the resources like you have, the books, etc. So we'll definitely put those you've recommended there into that resource as well for people. One of the things that I'm interested in then, we've talked a lot about products, and products in the mainstream as well, in the mainstream market, sort of not necessarily in the social enterprise sector. But one of the things that I've kind of come across and kind of been struggling with a little bit is sometimes particularly social enterprises sometimes create products that are replacements to existing products. But there's part of me that thinks, are we, is that the right approach? Are we really being radical enough in the way that we're thinking about redesigning products or but solutions to things, but also redesigning the way we live in terms of consumerism? Because actually for many people it's this constant consumerism and the buying of things that is actually the biggest issue. So I'm interested in your perspectives in terms of social enterprises that start up to create alternatives, but alternatives maybe that we don't really need, and actually we should be thinking bigger about eradicating some stuff in our lives.
That can be a really hard balance, because on one hand you need to make the income to survive, so you need to sell something, but on the other hand you don't want to be making something that's just contributing to this overconsumption and these problems. So I see that when I work with ethical fashion brands a lot, that if you imagine ethical consumers on a spectrum, when you get really far into ethical living, you actually stop buying a lot of clothes. So a lot of people will just wear what they already have. They'll maybe buy from charity shops if they need things. They'll occasionally buy from ethical brands, but they really stop consuming. So the easier sales to make are in the middle ground, where people are starting to move away from these fast fashion brands and into ethical fashion. But then it's doing that education work alongside of it of, okay, if you are going to buy clothes, please buy our products because they're ethically made, but please also consider buying less. So it's juggling that message of buy less, buy well, and then make it last. So I think it's hard for social enterprises to make that decision, but I think the most effective way you can do that, and the most effective way you can go down the route of making something that people still need, is a concept called product market fit. So we use this a lot in the tech world, coming from my tech background, and also the lean startup model. So a lot of tech companies will use lean startup as a way of scaling really, really quickly. So if you look at some of the unicorn tech companies we've had, like Uber, they will use lean startup to basically get to their audience and scale as quickly as possible to make that income. And there's a lot that we can learn in the social enterprise space from the way that tech companies do that. And what they do is they find a core group of users, and they almost build their audience first, and then they find what problem that audience has, and they design something that solves that problem. So you'll notice with apps, if you are an early adopter and you're somebody who jumps on the latest app and the latest trend in the tech world, what you start with will change really, really rapidly as they expand their user base, and they're constantly observing their users. So they're collecting what we call big data, which is basically looking at everybody who's using Uber, not looking at them as individuals, but looking at their overall behavior trends and what they're doing. And they will take that on board, and they will adapt, and they will change features, and they will add and take away things. So they're not scared to completely change direction. It's all driven by the users and the user behavior, and that is what we call growth hacking, and it's a way of scaling really, really quickly. And I think if social enterprises can come in with that innovative attitude that actually we're going to growth hack our way to as much impact as possible, so we know what impact we want to make, we know what cause we want to have an impact on, we're going to find the people that really care about that cause, because it's going to be an easy connection to make, and then we're going to work with them to design a product or service that solves a problem that they have. Because whenever you're selling any product or service, people are only buying it because it solves a problem for them. That's just in general in everything, social enterprise or not. So actually, if you can lead with problem first and you can growth hack your way through, we can actually redesign consumption, because we can solve our problems with better produced products and services. So I think for new social enterprises who are coming into the market, look for the problem first and design the product. Don't come up with the product and then try and find the problem and make that fit, because you will grow quicker, you'll sell more, and you'll be more successful. If you're an existing social enterprise who already has a product or service, it's about looking for the people that have the problem that solves, and then not being so precious about that product that you're not willing to change it and adapt it. So get the feedback from the people that are already using it, that are already buying it, and make it better.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think that's it, isn't it? Specifically for startups, but also for social enterprises that already exist, asking themselves, is the problem that we think we're tackling actually the problem, or is it a bigger, So for example, and we go back to fashion, is the problem that some of our cotton isn't organic the problem? Or is it the fact that, we just, a bigger issue that we need to tackle on a bigger, the consumerism, the fast fashion, the unfair wages in the whole supply chain? There's actually a bigger issue there that we're going to solve, potentially with the same solution, but we're tackling a bigger problem. And I think it's just kind of trying to be savvy and unpack, isn't it, what the actual problem is.
Yeah, and fashion's a really good example, because I think a lot of people currently in the ethical fashion space is going through a big change now, because brands are seeing how profitable it can be to be an ethical fashion brand. Mm-hmm. And because the government are showing an interest now, there's probably going to be legislation that means that they have to change. So the proactive ones are getting ahead of that. But if you look at a lot of the ethical fashion brands who have been on the scene for the past 5-10 years, most of the founders, most of them are owner managed businesses. So it's one person or a very small team. And most of them will tell you, I don't have a fashion background. I'm interested in it because I didn't like the way my clothes were being made. So I learned about the fashion. I learned how to start a fashion brand. And that's fine, you can do that really successfully, but a lot of them are driven by the sustainability aspect of it and driven by the ethics aspect of it rather than the fashion. And the problem is going to be in that space that the big fashion houses and the big fast fashion brands are going to latch onto it, and it's going to be easier for them to learn the sustainability and the ethics than it is for you to learn the fashion. So a lot of the brands, unfortunately, aren't going to survive that shift. And a lot of them, when you talk to them, are saying, actually, that's okay because it means we're achieving the change that we want in the industry. But the ones that are really savvy are going to get ahead of that and are going to say, do you know what, we're going to stop making the clothes that we're making because it's hard to sell them. They're more expensive. We're a very niche market still. We're fighting against the tide here, and we're not from a fashion background, so maybe making clothes isn't our forte. Mm-hmm. And what we're going to do is take the knowledge that we've learned about applying sustainability and ethics and sell that as a service, because these big brands are going to be looking for experts to come in and say, okay, how can we clean up your supply chain? How can we clean up your cotton production? And so I think the really savvy ones are going to get ahead of that and say, actually, the problem has changed, so we need to change as well.
And that's it, isn't it? One of the key things in business is being adaptable and innovative and ready to be flexible to the changing market dynamics that are happening. And I think that's only going to be the case, over the next 5 to 10 years. It's just going to be rapid in terms of those changes. And before we finish, Sian, I know you recently had the Shop Ethical Instead campaign. So tell us a little bit about that and why you started that up.
Yeah, so obviously we've just had Black Friday this time last week, and I'm still recovering. I don't know about everyone else, but still clearing out my inbox and getting rid of all the junk. And it just felt like Shop Ethical Instead started last year because for me, it just felt overwhelming. And although I like to think of myself as a pretty ethical consumer, and I do tend to only buy things that I need, and when I need them, I look for the most ethical option, I still felt myself get swept up in this tide of advertising messaging, because advertising and marketing is very clever. It psychologically gets to us and appeals to our instincts. So a lot of it happens subconsciously. The decision to buy happens subconsciously. So it's really hard to resist that. It's really hard to break that habit and change that tide. And obviously there's some amazing campaigns like Buy Nothing Day and Boycott Black Friday, but it was really hard to resist the urge to shop. So I was just thinking, well, what if actually instead of shopping at Amazon or with these big corporates that aren't great ethically, aren't sustainable, aren't paying their taxes, what if we spent with smaller ethical businesses? So you can still do your Christmas shopping, you can still get the nice little dopamine hit that you've bought something, but you've supported a small business owner and you've had a positive impact ethically and sustainably. And that's where Shop Ethical Instead really came from. So last year and this year we had brands on board who sponsored the campaign, who featured on our blog and hosted a Twitter chat, so one of our Ethical Hour Twitter chats, all about this topic. And we really just want to spread that hashtag far and wide and spread that message far and wide. And we're keeping it going up until Christmas, because obviously this is a key time for small retailers. And actually for small businesses, up to 2/3 of their annual revenue can come from this period. So it really is crucial for their survival. And I really loved the idea that when you buy from a small business, somebody does a happy dance, because I know that's true. When people book to work with me, I do a little happy dance. I know from friends that run small businesses. So we're trying to spread the idea of spread more happy dances, make more people happy, and buy ethically and sustainably. So how that's working is, if you are a business with a product or service to sell, you can promote it using the hashtag across social media, and we will repost as much as possible. If you are buying from a small business, please do shout them out and celebrate them. Obviously, you might not want to take a picture of what you bought, because if it's a gift to someone who follows you, you might want to be a bit careful about that and not give it away until after Christmas, but still shout about what you're buying and who you're supporting. And if you are a small business owner who gets purchases, consider showing your happy dance on social media. We will repost it if you're feeling brave. And really, just getting the word out there and spreading this message of shop ethical instead. So if you're looking for products and services this Christmas as gifts or for yourself, just think about, is there a more ethical, sustainable option? And if you're not sure, come into Ethical Hour, either on Twitter using the hashtag or in our Facebook group, and ask us, because the chances are we will be able to find you one. I had a lady yesterday, I think it was, asking for more sustainable Christmas crackers, because her kids really want Christmas crackers. She wants to be more ethical and sustainable, and we do have a brand that does reusable Christmas crackers, so we recommended them. So it's nice and easy, helps you find things, and spreads a bit more joy at Christmas.
Absolutely. So it's supporting buying local, buying small, buying from ethical or social enterprises, and businesses that are obviously committing them to do good, either socially or environmentally. True. Yeah. Maybe charity shops as well. I mentioned this.
Yeah, charity shops. I think just think about, okay, so you want to buy a gift for your dad. How can that gift make as many people happy as possible? So if I go and buy it from Amazon, it's probably just going to make my dad happy. And it might make me happy because it was convenient and it was quick and it arrived the next day. But if I go and buy it from a small business, it's going to make the person who made it happy. It's going to make the small business owner happy. If it's giving back to charity in some way, it's going to make other people that benefit from that happy. So it has this whole knock-on effect.
No, definitely. Really, really powerful. So if you haven't already checked it out, look up the hashtag shop ethical instead. Really important that we make that campaign big as Black Friday. So Sian, it's been brilliant talking to you. My last question is, what really excites you or brings you hope about the social enterprise sector over the next 5 to 10 years?
Good question. I just love the social impact sector and social enterprise sector, and I get excited every day because I meet social entrepreneurs who've got really innovative solutions to problems that we have and have amazing products. So I think we're seeing an uptake in the quality, an increase in the quality of the products and services in the social enterprise sector, and we're seeing the mainstream media, even the government has got now that they're going to procure from more social enterprises. So we're seeing a whole uptake in this sector. And I think what gives me the most hope is the fact that ordinary consumers who wouldn't necessarily count themselves as an ethical consumer are starting to engage with these issues and these conversations. And what is amazing is that there's this whole bank of social enterprises who are just there ready and waiting. So if you decide that you want to cut plastic out, there's a whole group of small businesses and social enterprises who can help you do that. So I think we're really going to see massive growth over the next 10 years and can't wait to be part of it.
Yeah, no, definitely. Thank you for sharing that. For Sian, it's been absolutely brilliant talking to you. An absolute pleasure. It's always really insightful and loads of great ideas and stuff. So thank you so much for sharing everything, and particularly all the knowledge that you had and the sort of stats and the trends at the beginning. I think that's really, really valuable for us as consumers and business owners as well. And yeah, have a great weekend.
You too. Thanks, Kat. It's been great to be part of it. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. Bye-bye.
Bye.